The Verdict, Episode 4, The Roman Empire, the greatest civilization ever built or the most overrated.
For 2,000 years, we have been told that Rome gave us civilization itself. But what if that story, the one we've been telling since school, is only half true? Today, on The Verdict, we put the Roman Empire on trial. At its peak in 117 AD, the Roman Empire stretched from Scotland to the sands of Mesopotamia. It governed an estimated 70 million people, roughly 20% of the entire world's population at the time. It lasted, in various forms, for over 1,000 years. It produced Julius Caesar, Augustus, Marcus Aurelius. It built the Colosseum, the Pantheon, and thousands of miles of roads that are still in use today. When it finally fell in 476 AD, or 1453 AD if you count the Eastern Byzantine Empire, it left a hole in history so large that Europeans spent the next 1,000 years trying to fill it. The Renaissance was literally named after the attempt to be reborn as Rome. So the question isn't whether Rome was great. It clearly was. The question is, was it as great as we think? And did it deserve its reputation? Let's start with what Rome actually was beneath the marble. Rome was built on slavery. At its peak, historians estimate that between 30 and 40% of the population of Roman Italy were enslaved people. The roads, the aqueducts, the grand buildings we admire, built largely by forced labor. The Roman economy was so dependent on slavery that it actively discouraged technological innovation. Why invent a machine when you have thousands of slaves to do the work? Rome was also extraordinarily violent, not just in war, but as entertainment. The gladiatorial games, the public executions, the animal hunts in the Colosseum. These weren't fringe events. They were mainstream culture, attended by emperors and celebrated by poets. And Rome's famous law and order? It was deeply unequal. Justice depended almost entirely on your social class. The rich could bribe their way out of almost anything. The poor had almost no recourse. Then there's the question of originality. Much of what we credit to Rome was borrowed. From Greece, from Egypt, from the civilizations it conquered. Roman art, philosophy, mathematics, medicine, heavily derived from Greek foundations. Rome was a brilliant adapter and organizer. But was it truly an innovator? And finally, the fall, a civilization that lasted 1,000 years and left behind the Dark Ages. Centuries of poverty, illiteracy, and collapse across Europe. If Rome was so great, why did everything fall apart so completely when it was gone? But the prosecution has more to add. Let's talk about what Rome did to the peoples it conquered, because the word civilization sounds very different depending on which side of the Roman sword you were on. Carthage, once the greatest city in the Western Mediterranean, with a population estimated at 500,000 people, was razed to the ground in 146 BC. The city was burned, its population killed or enslaved, and according to tradition, the land was salted so nothing could grow again. Rome didn't just defeat Carthage, it erased it from the map. In Judea, Rome suppressed two major revolts by destroying Jerusalem, demolishing the Second Temple, the holiest site in Judaism, and scattering the Jewish population across the empire in what became known as the Jewish diaspora. Historians estimate that hundreds of thousands, possibly over 1 million people, were killed or enslaved in those campaigns. In Britain, in Gaul, in Dacia, the pattern repeated. Conquest was followed by heavy taxation, cultural suppression, and the enslavement of those who resisted. The Pax Romana, the famous Roman peace, was only peaceful if you had already submitted. For those who hadn't, it looked very much like war without end. There's another charge that rarely makes it into the history books. Rome was an ecological catastrophe. To build its fleets, heat its bathhouses, and smelt its metals, Rome deforested vast stretches of the Mediterranean world. North Africa, today largely desert, was once a fertile breadbasket. Roman farming techniques and deforestation stripped the topsoil over centuries. Lead from Roman mines and plumbing-contaminated water supplies across the empire. Some historians have even argued that low-level lead poisoning, from lead pipes, lead cooking vessels, and lead-sweetened wine, contributed to the cognitive decline of Rome's ruling class. And then, there is the political reality of Roman governance. We speak of Roman stability, but the 3rd century AD, known as the crisis of the 3rd century, saw more than 20 emperors in just 50 years. Nearly all of them were assassinated. The Senate was powerless. The army chose and disposed of emperors at will. For 50 years, the greatest empire in the world was in a state of near-permanent civil war. That is not civilization. That is organized chaos wearing a toga. And yet, the case for Rome is genuinely extraordinary. Let's start with governance. Rome created legal frameworks that still underpin modern law. The concept of innocent until proven guilty, the right to face your accuser, the idea of legal personhood. These are Roman innovations that shaped every legal system in the Western world. Engineering. The Roman aqueduct system delivered clean water to cities of 1 million people, a feat that wouldn't be matched in Europe for over 1,000 years after Rome's fall. Roman concrete, opus caementicium, was so advanced that scientists are still studying it today. Some Roman harbors built with it have actually gotten stronger over 2 millennia because of how the concrete reacts with seawater. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, lasting roughly 200 years from 27 BC to 180 AD, was one of the longest periods of relative stability and prosperity in human history. Trade flourished, cities grew, life expectancy and living standards rose across the empire. And Rome's cultural legacy is simply unmatched. Latin gave birth to French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and Romanian, languages spoken by nearly 1 billion people today. The Catholic Church, the most influential institution in Western history, was built on Roman foundations, in the Roman language, using Roman administrative structures. Even the calendar, the months of the year, the 7-day week, the leap year, all Roman. We don't just study Rome, we live inside it. Now, the defense goes deeper. Consider Roman citizenship. In 212 AD, Emperor Caracalla issued the Edict of Caracalla, extending Roman citizenship to virtually every free person in the empire, regardless of ethnicity, language, or origin. A Gaul, a Syrian, an Egyptian, a Briton, all became Roman citizens under the same legal framework. This was radical. The idea that civic identity could transcend blood and tribe, that a person's rights came from their membership in a political community rather than their ancestry, is one of the most important concepts in human history. It is the direct ancestor of modern citizenship, of passports, of the nation-state itself. Rome didn't just build roads. It built the idea that people could belong to something larger than their village. Then there's public health, an area where Rome was so far ahead of its time that it's almost difficult to comprehend. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer system, was one of the first major sewage systems in the world, built in the 6th century BC and still functioning today. Rome had public bathhouses in every city and town across the empire, not as luxury, but as civic infrastructure, open to all citizens. It had hospitals, the Valetudinaria, first built for soldiers and later expanded to civilians. Rome treated public health as a state responsibility. That concept, that a government owes its people clean water, sanitation, and medical care, would not become standard again in Europe until the 19th century. Rome was operating on those principles 2,000 years earlier. Consider also what Rome preserved. The great works of Greek philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, survived because Roman scholars translated, copied, and studied them. the science of Archimedes, the medicine of Hippocrates, the history of Thucydides. These reached the modern world through Roman hands. Without Rome's role as a cultural archive, the Greek intellectual tradition that underlies Western civilization might have been lost entirely. The Renaissance wasn't just inspired by Rome, it was made possible by what Rome saved. And finally, Roman law's global reach. In the 6th century AD, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian commissioned the Corpus Juris Civilis, a comprehensive codification of all Roman law. That document became the legal foundation of almost every continental European legal system: French law, German law, Spanish law, Italian law, the legal codes of Latin America, of parts of Africa, of Scotland. When you sign a contract today, when you stand in a courtroom, when a judge reads a sentence, the language, the concepts, and the structure of that moment trace back directly to Roman jurists who lived 2,000 years ago. That is not influence. That is something close to immortality. So, what's the verdict? Rome was not the perfect civilization its admirers claim. It was built on slavery, sustained by violence, and its collapse plunged Europe into centuries of darkness. It erased Carthage, it scattered the Jewish people, it deforested entire regions and poisoned its own citizens with lead. Its politics were chronically unstable, its justice system was rigged in favor of the wealthy, and the Pax Romana was only peaceful for those who had already surrendered. These are not footnotes, they are the cost of the Roman project. But Rome was also genuinely one of the most consequential and impressive human achievements in history. Its legal, linguistic, architectural, and cultural legacy shapes our world every single day, whether we realize it or not. It gave us the concept of citizenship. It built the infrastructure of public health. It preserved the knowledge of the ancient world and transmitted it to the future. It codified laws that are still in use today, in courtrooms on every continent. The verdict? Rome deserves its reputation, but not blindly. It was great and brutal, innovative and derivative, a beacon of order that rested on a foundation of enormous human suffering. The real lesson of Rome isn't that it was perfect. It's that even the greatest civilizations carry within them the seeds of their own contradictions. Rome could build the most sophisticated legal system the ancient world had ever seen, and use it to institutionalize slavery. It could deliver clean water to 1 million people and poison them with the same pipes. It could preserve the knowledge of the ages and burn an entire city to the ground. And perhaps, if we're honest, that's a lesson worth remembering today. That's the verdict. Is Rome the greatest civilization ever built, or the most overrated? Drop your verdict in the comments. I read every single one. If you've made it this far, you clearly love history as much as I do. Hit subscribe, because next week, another giant of history goes on trial. History isn't just the past, it's the mirror we hold up to the present.